Starting the recording. So welcome to the Natural Cambridgeshire Partnership Forum. Today we have a variety of talks about species, about habitats and about nature recovery, and we're hoping to have some rich discussions along the way. So welcome. Do pop yourself on mute and so that we can make sure everybody can hear the talk. Today we have, I'm actually chairing, I'm Pamela Abbott, I'm a Director of Natural Cambridgeshire. I'm also giving a talk on grasshoppers, and then this will be followed by Chris Hewson from the BTO, who's going to be talking about tracking our summer migrant birds to understand populations in the UK. And then we're also going to have Rob Mungovan from the Wild Trout Trust talking about a perspective on chalk streams. And then Gabriella Yeomans is going to update us on where we are with local nature recovery strategy. And we're going to have a lovely QR code for those of you who haven't done our survey yet. I noticed this morning that the Wildlife Trust have sent it out on their social media, which is great. And we will be promoting that to everyone. And for those of you who have a group that you are part of, we also have a group survey, and Gabriella will be telling you about that at the end. Okay, so I am first up, and I'm just going to share my screen. And now the little button is out of the way. It's always the way with these things. Yes, there we are. So I am going to talk about Cambridgeshire grasshoppers, past, present and future. And this is a picture of one of the potential future grasshoppers in Cambridgeshire, the large marsh grasshopper. Just to give you a bit of a background here, we were talking, just some of us as we joined, about the huge diversity of Orthoptera, which is embraces crickets, bush crickets, small crickets, grasshoppers and groundhoppers. This, in France, there are 200 species. In Spain and Portugal and Western Europe, they're kind of up to 800, 900 species. As you can see here, even including all those other species, genus, we actually have 34. And of the 14 grasshoppers that are found in the British Isles, we have 6 in Cambridgeshire. And one of those hasn't been seen for quite a while. And I'm just going to go through some of those grasshoppers that you can see listed here in black. From kind of common to less common, and one which may be making its way over the border naturally from Bedfordshire quite soon, and one to watch out for, and another one that is subject to a reintroduction project which has already successfully established them in Norfolk. So here's a little grasshoppers and crickets moment. So at the top left, we have the wonderful cricket, house cricket, which is sort of found in buildings throughout the UK, less common now than it used to be, but actually those everything is less common now than it used to be, particularly in Cambridgeshire. And then you may have seen it. These have landed on my car and I've got quite excited about it. The oak bush cricket, the bottom left slide, they're really quite common, and the crickets are omnivores, the grasshoppers are herbivores, and they have the ears in different places. And the interesting fact that I learned last night is that crickets, they kind of hold their legs apart so that their ears can get a stereo sound. So that's a bit like, I don't know if you ever hold your mobile phone up to your chin in order to get stereo sound, or perhaps you just put your speakers a little bit further away. But crickets are doing this just with their bodies, really quite amazing. So they have their kind of auditory tympanum in their knees, and other grasshoppers have them in their legs. So a little bit about the local species now. This is the mottled grasshopper. You could hardly see it, could you, in the habitat there? And I think the other thing to speak about grasshoppers is that they are really very varied. So you might see something that really looks like a meadow grasshopper, but it might be kind of one of the other grasshoppers in disguise. So they're really quite tricky into some respects to telling apart. But the mottled grasshopper is the smallest of the species, really quite variable, and it is the only one in Cambridgeshire that actually has the clubbed antenna. And there's a little bit of a close-up here. It's the male that has clubbed antennae, and that is the right hand of your picture there. And then we have the common field, and this has, I don't know if you can see it from the picture, it has the kind of rather hairy tummy, and that's one of the ways that we can distinguish it. It's most widespread. It's a kind of pioneer species, and it's very variable in colour. It's often to be found on lawns. My suspicion is that if you have a garden with a lawn, you will have the common field grasshopper in your garden. Next is the meadow grasshopper, and this one has tiny, tiny wings. If you can just see the wings just above its abdomen there, they're really quite small, and the females are even more short-winged, and this is a female here, and it has quite dark hind legs. The next one is the lesser marsh, which is rather similar to the meadow, but it's a bit larger, it's longer winged, and then it has this parallel keels, the markings on its back. And it can be found in any colour, from this sort of fawn colour here through to green to pink and to purple. So it's a very kind of variable grasshopper. And then this is actually called the common green grasshopper, but in Cambridgeshire it's not common at all. It's mainly a wetland species, and this is a very green one. The female is very green. It has a very distinctive song, a bit like a freewheeling bike, that runs for about 10 to 20 seconds. And it's on droves in fens, so you might find it out there if you're more northern and easterly based, and it's rather fine. And the next one, this is a keep an eye out for it if you are out on a chalk grassland, perhaps Devil's Dyke or somewhere like that. It hasn't been recorded, and recently. It was definitely found until the 1970s. My naturalist colleagues feel that actually there are still probably some populations in Cambridgeshire. It would be really amazing if you could find it. It has this very distinctive ladder-like pattern on the wing, if you can see it there, and a little white comma on the wing as well. And it does a different way of calling or stridulating than the other grasshoppers. They rub their legs up and down, or the legs and their wings up and down, whereas this one, it does alternate swinging their legs together. So quite exciting. And then a final one, which is not in Cambridgeshire currently, but is just over the border in Bedfordshire. And it would be really interesting if you looked out for it, and if you were the type of person that maybe went onto iNaturalist or one of those other apps and spotted it. But again, it's another one with the clubbed antennae, but it's a slightly darker form. And it is also to be found on kind of south-facing chalky grasses. And so sort of Devil's Dyke, Fleam's Dyke, it may be spreading along from the Chilterns. So it'd be really interesting if we get any record of that. And I'm fascinated to know if we do. So those are the ones that are kind of there, present in Cambridgeshire at the moment. And now I just want to go on to talk about one which is hopefully going to be reintroduced to Cambridgeshire as part of our looking after a species which is really threatened by climate change and habitat fragmentation in its current native habitat. And that is the large marsh grasshopper. And I have to declare an interest here. I chair a kind of rewilding organisation called Citizen Zoo, and this is one of the projects that we're doing in collaboration with the Wildlife Trust of Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Northamptonshire, as well as the Wildlife Trust of Norfolk, and also various organisations in Norfolk, such as the Natural England sites and latterly some sites on the Broads. And the idea is that, you know, we're looking to the past to inspire a wilder future. And I think this is not just looking to the past and reintroducing species that had no chance of continuing because there were reasons that they died out, but actually looking to where we are recovering nature, where we have restored habitats, and where some of the species will just make their way back naturally. Birds are very good at this. Sometimes reptiles are, not so much bullfrogs or chub, but those things that don't need our help will make their way back. Those things which do need our help, because it's really too far, they do fly a very long way, the large marsh grasshopper, but it really is too far from the New Forest to come back to Cambridgeshire. And it's not quite the rarest. The Hewson grasshopper is rarer, but it is one of the rarest. It is the largest, and I think it is the most magnificent and beautiful grasshopper. And here we can see that it's kind of surviving but declining. It's in the Somerset levels. There's a query as to whether that was kind of covert reintroduction or whether it was just never really found. It's also found in the New Forest in Dorset, and as you can see, was extinct sort of north of this line, but very excitingly is now back. And I was just going to tell you a little bit about the project that has brought that back very, very quickly, because I think it will be coming to Cambridgeshire next year. And I also just wanted to say that this is a species that has appeared in the 2023 State of Nature report as one of the success stories of a species that is declining in its range, but over its former range, as a result of this, is now increasing and has appropriate habitat. It's a project that started way back in sort of 2016 with a youth group doing surveys. Also, we had Stuart Newsom from the British Trust for Ornithology, where our other speaker today is coming, looking at acoustic monitoring and surveying, because before you reintroduce, you really need to know that the species populations aren't sort of clinging on and have just never been found. It's been a fascinating project. We've been down to the New Forest with all of the proper permissions from Natural England and the Forestry Commission to collect grasshoppers, to breed them. We've been in the sunshine, we've been in the rain, and we have an expert, Stuart Green, who has done his PhD on this subject and has developed a way of breeding. These grasshoppers breed when we bring them back from the New Forest. He stores the egg pods in petri dishes in the fridge, and then we recruit citizen keepers who we train, and we give them a little egg pod, we give them a cage, and they grow from it being this kind of terribly barren thing, and they pick grass every day, and then you get hundreds of grasshoppers. We keep them together in a little Facebook group. We then release them, often marking them into these sites where they've been reintroduced. Last year, we reintroduced over the total time, it came to 5,498 individual large marsh grasshoppers that we had introduced into Norfolk. Very annoyingly, not 5,500, but there we go. We have to be accurate about these things. And we have done a population assessment by sort of mark and recapture, that we now, on one particular site, we have reintroduced 2,000 to that site over the last 4 years, and we now have a population of estimate of 414. So it's a real success story. We have all generations involved in our citizen keepers. The chair of Natural England came out with us on a release and said that it was one of the best days in nature he had last year. We keep very accurate records, and very excited to see, that in 2019, from a small translocation amount, we had our first native-born male, and then in 2020, our first captive reared from reintroduced the year before in 2019, our first sort of breeding population, which is our female on the right. It's been very widely talked about because I think people get very excited about this. And that's even my last slide, and I am always quite tricky when you're chairing at the same time as I'm doing, but I think I've had my allocated amount of time. And I will stop now and ask if anyone has any questions or any interactions that they would like to have about. I see we do have some things in the chat. And so there we go. So do the very small wings on the meadow help it to fly, or does it just hop? So I am more of a person that knows quite a lot about large marsh grasshoppers, which fly a tremendous way. Less about the meadow grasshopper, but my thinking is that yes, that is true. And if anyone is a better naturalist than me, which is probably, I would say, probably at least 2/3 of the population which is attending today, you are very welcome to come on in there. They said to us when we started the Large Marsh Grasshopper project that, oh, they don't fly very far. And then we went on a very hot day and they fly a tremendous distance. I have some fascinating videos of us chasing them across the bog. And it's always quite hazardous chasing them across the bog because you have this thing called hover, whereby you think you're on solid ground. And in fact, one false step and you could be 2 meters under. So we put a stick down to 2 meters in those spaces. So we are very careful when we are chasing them across the bog. I think they do just hop, but I'm very happy to be corrected by anyone who is more of a grasshopper expert than me. Roger, please come in on meadow grasshoppers.
I've looked it up and they spring, they hop, they don't fly. So you're right.
Excellent. Oh, and then from Laura, where should we send citizen keepers if they would like more info? So we do have the Citizens Zoo have a website where we have information about it. Also, you could get in contact with me or with Helen and sorry, Helen, we could pass it on to the relevant organisation as well. We would love to see more hoppers. We actually do our training in Camborne at the Wildlife Trust headquarters when we bring our citizen keepers together. Quinton, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I can't find the raise hand button on my Zoom at the moment. So I'm to do this the old-fashioned way. Just curious, last year I remember going to a meeting with about one of the university projects, and they were talking there. They've been doing surveys of ground nesting birds on solar farm sites, on the grounds that solar farm on grassland are providing a potential habitat. And the results were quite startling, actually, in terms of some species. Bearing in mind, this isn't my area of expertise at all, but so some species showed huge increases because that managed habitat suited them, particularly ground nesting birds. Others showed a decline because the panels basically got in the way. And I'm just wondering, is that the kind of, do those sites provide the suitable habitats potentially for grasshoppers in the same way they do for ground nesting birds? And is that something worth surveying in the same way the university survey birds?
I think that's a really good idea, and I think the kind of large scale habitat mosaic as well as the small scale heterogeneity within a habitat. I mean, I can just look at site and know where the large marsh grasshoppers are going to be from having got my eye in for those particular things. And I suspect there are naturalists who could look at those kind of different sites and actually sort of predict where they are, as well as think about how you manage those for the different types of grasshoppers. Some really like the ones that like the chalk grassland. Often it's not necessarily the chalk; it's the really shortness of it, rather than the underlying, or it could be the species. But yeah, and anyone else want to come in on anything further on that? I think that's a really good idea. Whether we get permission to go on those solar farms to do that, but I think we should be investigating. Roger, you're coming to my rescue as the captive naturalist. Thank you.
I can't quote work on that. I know there's been quite a lot of work being done on this, and also interestingly, I think it's not in this country. Elsewhere, they've now found that vertical solar panels, although they're compromised in getting electricity, are better for wildlife, and indeed they're using them with agriculture now. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on this to see what the optimal conditions are for how you place your solar panels and what you get. But I know there's a lot of work going on this.
Brilliant, thank you. And Rob, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say there are 2 very good solar farms in South Cambs. Out of the many that popped up, there's the Bourne solar farm, which was certainly very well wildflower seeded, was awash with butterflies one summer when I was there. And there's the one in the nature reserve at Shingai-cum-Wendy, which is a very large one. And pleased to say that the fence was lifted at the bottom of that to allow brown hares and badgers to get in, which might affect the ground nesting birds. But certainly some of the solar farms did follow what they set out to do and have got extensive wildflowers beneath them that could be worth a look.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, my badger has eaten all my ivy bees. So yes, it's a kind of mixed blessing sometimes, isn't it, letting all the wildlife in. Excellent. Right, I think if there's no further questions, and just to reiterate Peter's request in the chat, that we would love to have more suggestions for talks, particularly as well as if kind of somebody who could give that talk, that would be particularly good. So our next speaker is Chris Hewson from the BTO. So Chris is a senior research ecologist in the Framing Futures team. And his mission, which I'm sure he will tell you more about, is to increase the knowledge of migratory ecology of bird species. And he's been tracking cuckoos and looking at patterns of swifts, nightingales, warblers. And I won't steal any more of his thunder, and will hand over to Chris.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Brilliant. I'll just try and share my screen if I can. Okay. Can you see that okay? Brilliant. Okay, so the title of my talk, as you can see, is Tracking Our Summer Migrant Birds to Understand Population Declines. And I'll start by giving you some background as to why we're doing this work in the first place. And you can see that we've got a graph here which shows the population changes of birds according to the Breeding Bird Survey. And we've got bars going off to the right showing population increases, and bars going off to the left showing population declines. And the first thing to notice is that we've got a large number of bars here showing substantial declines in recent decades of some of our most iconic and popular summer visiting birds. So that includes the cuckoo, the iconic harbinger of spring, and that has declined. Oh, I don't know whether you can see that, but it's off the top of my screen for me, unfortunately. That's declined by over 70% in England over the last 53 years. There's been a smaller but still substantial decline in the last quarter of a century across the UK, but that masks a substantial regional variation. So there's been a huge 71% decline in the last quarter of a century in England, but in the last 10 or 11 years, there's been a bit of a resurgence going on in Scotland, which has balanced that out a little bit. We also have the swift, a fantastic aerial species. It might be flying constantly for 9 or 10 months of the year before returning to breed in the roofs of our houses. And that has undergone a really big decline of 60% in the last quarter of a century. And that's exactly the same whether you look at the UK or just in England. We have the nightingale, famed for the quality of its song in poetry and literature, which has declined by 91% in 53 years. So we've lost, in the time I've been alive, more than 9 out of 10 of the nightingales which existed. And I know that that's been particularly the case where I am here in South Cambridgeshire. And over the last quarter of a century, a substantial 48% decline. So there's still a big decline going on with nightingales. And then finally, spotted flycatchers, perhaps less well known to the general public than some of those other species, but nonetheless popular on account of its fly catching behaviour, which catches the eyes in our gardens, and the fact that they come to breed on our houses and sheds in our gardens makes them more conspicuous than many birds. And we've lost 92% of those, so very similar to nightingales, over the last 53 years, and a huge 63% decline further in the last quarter of a century. So if we go back to this graph and we colour in the bars according to where species spend the winter, you can see that the colours aren't evenly distributed across the graph. And that's because we've got relationships between the recent population changes of these migratory species and where they spend the winter. So if we group all of these bars together according to where they spend the winter into their respective groups and plot trend lines, we come up with a graph that looks something like this. So we've got a red line showing the recent constant populations of resident species, so those which spend the winter here where they breed. We've got a purple line showing the recent population increases of northern species, so those which winter north of the Sahara in southern Europe, blackcaps and chiffchaffs, two of the most conspicuous of those. This orange line shows the recent population fluctuations of arid zone species. So those are the birds which winter in the Sahel, just south of the Sahara. And then we've got a blue line showing the slow but constant population decline of southern species, those which winter in southern Africa. And finally, a severe decline, which is ongoing in humid zone species, so those which winter in the humid tropics of West and Central Africa, close to the equator. Now, each one of those groups is a summary group, but it hides a diversity and complexity of potential migration strategies for, sorry, for all these different species. And it's against this background that we started our first tracking project using geolocators, which are the smallest tracking devices. And you can see this nightingale on the left here wearing a geolocator provided by the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge, with a light sensor here on the end of the light stalk to keep it away from shading by the feathers. Geolocators are basically archival light level recorders. They record readings every 2 minutes against a very accurate clock and calendar, and that allows us to collect data like this. You can see 3 daily cycles here with increasing light levels in the morning, variable shading due to vegetation and the behavior of the bird, etc., during the day, and then decreasing light levels in the evening. This red line here is a threshold that we use to define our twilight event set to a low light level. One of the drawbacks of geolocators is that the accuracy is dependent on calibration for latitude. And by that, what I mean is, I'll show you here. With green line here where we've defined our dawn event by a threshold, a red line where we've defined our dusk event. And the time between the two is what we define as day length. But for that to be useful for us to locate our bird on the Earth, it needs to be calibrated. In other words, we need to relate the passing of these thresholds to an astronomical event. In other words, how far above or below the horizon is the sun when this event occurs? And that's what we mean by calibration. In contrast, solar midday is simply the midpoint between our two twilight events that we've defined. And this allows us to get longitude. So we've got 360 degrees of rotation around the Earth, 24 hours in a day. So for every 1 hour that solar midday is shifted, birds move 15 degrees around the Earth's surface. So the result of all this is that longitude and the timing of movements are easier to determine than latitude. Latitude, of course, you've also got no latitudinal variation in day length around close to the equinoxes, so we can't do that at all. But perhaps the biggest drawback of these tiny devices is that they have to be retrieved for the data to be downloaded. So we only get information from returning birds, which means that we don't find out about that portion of the birds, which I hope to show you later on, is most important for understanding population decline sometimes, and those are the birds which don't make it back. Now, this map shows the migration of one of the nightingales that we tagged at Graffham Water. You see its southward migration in the yellow line here, showing it left the UK to a stopover in probably southern Portugal in early September, before migrating rapidly over the Sahara to a first stopover location in winter in Senegal or Gambia. And then in the middle of February, it moved to a second wintering location in Sierra Leone, before returning back via stopovers, probably in southern Spain and then in northern France, arriving back to Graffham Water on the 19th of April. Now, this map shows the midwinter locations of all of the nightingales tagged in our first couple of years of the study. And you can see they're extremely tightly clustered, certainly by geolocator result standards, in Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau. And this is actually the tightest clustering that's so far been recorded of any migratory bird, any population of any migratory bird anywhere in the world. And because they're in such a small area, they're obviously vulnerable. A small amount of habitat loss could be quite dramatically impactful on this population. And we know that this area, particularly the coastal strip in Senegal and Gambia, has undergone extensive transformation for agriculture, tourism, and other human developments. There's often a very narrow strip of high quality scrub in these areas. So this is something that we're currently looking at in more detail now to find out whether, as we suspect, this is contributing to the decline of the UK population of nightingales. Now, I mentioned that geolocators are our smallest devices, but they're getting smaller all the time. The smallest one currently available is this one, which weighs 1/3 of a gram, including this harness made from beading elastic. You can see the light sensor here hasn't got a light stalk, and the battery here. It's really a very tiny device indeed. And this has enabled us to track some of our smallest migratory birds, and that includes the spotted flycatcher. We track them from Cambridgeshire. you can see it's one of these devices on a spotted flycatcher here. It weighs less than 3% of the body weight of the bird, which means that we're confident that the birds will not be severely impacted by this device. And I think the results also suggest that's the case. And I'll show you now the migration of a typical spotted flycatcher, sort of summary. They all did more or less the same thing, or variations on the theme anyway. But before I show you that, I want you to remind you that this is actually a bird which weighs about the same as a £1 coin. So it really is a very tiny bird indeed. But anyway, we see that the birds leave the UK to a stopover probably in Portugal or Morocco, where they spend 1 to 3 weeks in September before crossing the Sahara. They then have a similar stopover on the southern side of the far western part of the Sahara for 2 or 3 weeks in late September to mid-October, before moving steadily, quite slowly, across the longitudes of West Africa. And then in sometime between October and December, they have a short stopover, can be longer, before they fly southwards over the Congo Basin to Angola, where they're resident from December onwards. With our geolocators, we don't pick up the beginning of the spring migration because they're moving northwards close to the equinox. But during April, first half of April, we see them moving westwards through the longitudes of West Africa, and then they make another stopover of 2 to 3 weeks between mid-April and early May in a similar location to where they stop off in autumn, before heading northwards over the Sahara to complete a 22,000-kilometre round trip journey. And we know that the spotted flycatcher, there appears to be a problem with recruitment and first-year survival rather than necessarily breeding success itself. So this is really a godsend in terms of the information to enable us to make an initial assessment of the threats that this population is undergoing, as well as to look at the migration strategies which we're doing, the way they move, which helps us to prescribe what sort of conservation action will be required to make sure that habitat is available through the annual cycle for these birds. Now, this shows a map. We did it for a bit of fun, really. It's the birds from Cambridgeshire plotted on a map of Angola to show the best estimates of where the locations are. You can't really do this as accurately as we were shown here. It was more for the householders who let us kindly tag birds, mostly in their gardens, that we did it. But you can see that one bird from Hatley St George had the shortest displacement of 6,800 kilometres from the tagging site, whereas the bird that we tagged at Halton, not so far from where I'm sitting now, actually was displaced by 7,700 kilometres from the tagging site to the midwinter. Later analyses suggest that actually, with more sophisticated techniques, suggest that actually many of these should actually probably be a bit further south. So actually these distances are a minimum, and some of these birds may actually be wintering in northern Namibia rather than in Angola, as shown here. But nonetheless, the general pattern of migration is as I've shown you. So moving from the smallest tagging tags that we have, geolocators, to the largest, which is satellite tracking. And the common cuckoo is an excellent model species for this work, partly because, as I've already explained, it has a declining population in Britain. It's also the largest small nocturnal migrant. So of that class of birds, it's the first one that we've been able to tag and track using satellite tracking technology, which has a number of advantages over other tracking techniques, as I will show you. And then thirdly, its migration is very poorly known. We knew from ringing recoveries, or at least we thought we did, that the birds left the UK and through Europe in a southeasterly direction. But beyond that, in Africa, we knew virtually nothing. The only piece of information we had was this ringing recovery of a juvenile ringed pied wagtail's nest in June 1928, which was recovered in January 1930, having been taken by man for the pot in Cameroon. But it's been the advent of this new technology, a 5-gram satellite tag from microwave telemetry, which has enabled us to basically revolutionize our understanding of cuckoo migration. So the tags are solar powered. You can see they've got a rechargeable battery, the solar cells on the back of the tag here. And they transmit signals for 10 hours, a very high quality constant radio signal. And the way that that changes as it's picked up by satellites passing overhead allows the satellite system to use the Doppler effect to work out whereabouts on the ground the tag must be, and therefore where the bird is. And the tags then switch off for 48 hours to allow the solar cells to recharge the battery. The result of this is that we get unbiased information. There's no need for recapture, so we get to find out all the information we need from every single bird that gets a tag on its back. So we not only get to find out where they go, but also where they die, which has been really important, as I'll go on to show you, in beginning to understand the causes of the population decline of the cuckoo in England in particular. And the result of all this is that we get close to real-time tracking across the entire annual cycle, which has been a real boon for the BTO in terms of public engagement, because the public have been able to follow the migrations of these birds and the progress of this research in virtually real time on our website. So this map shows the population changes of cuckoos according to the Breeding Bird Survey. In blue, we've got population declines, which you can see in the north and west, uplands of Highlands and Scotland in particular, whereas in the south and east, we've got red colours showing population declines. And it's against this background that in 2011, I think it was, we've had our first 5 birds in East Anglia, partly because it's close to our BTO HQ in Thetford, but also because it's right in the heart of the declining zone. And then over the next few years of the project, we tag birds in a number of locations across the UK, stratified by population trend, as well as by latitude and the major habitat types, out of the upland versus lowland in particular. This map here shows the southward migrations of cuckoos across the first few years of the project. And you can see that, as expected, we had some birds shown in red here, which migrated southeast to stopovers mostly in northern Italy, before moving southwards into sub-Saharan Africa, and finally to wintering zones in the western part of the Congo basin of Central Africa. But in yellow, unexpectedly, we had a number of birds which migrated southwest via Spain. Some entered the African continent at its far western part, before turning east and then converging on the routes of the other birds and ending up in exactly the same Western Congolian wintering grounds. So we had, in the first few years, 23 journeys by 20 birds migrating southwest and 33 by 22 birds migrating southeast. And we found that there was a significant difference in survival. So these are modelled estimates rather than simply the observed outcomes. Just over half of the birds on average surviving to complete the Sahara crossing that migrated via Spain, whereas nearly all of the birds which migrate via Italy in these first few years sample successfully reached tropical Africa. Now, not only did the birds survive differently, but they're also distributed differently across the UK. You can see from these pie graphs that in red here, in the uplands of Scotland and Wales, all of the birds migrated via the more successful routes via Italy, whereas across England, we had a variable mixture of birds taking the 2 routes, except for in Sherwood Forest, where in the initial sample of birds, all of the birds migrated via this more dangerous route via Spain. And the background to this map shows the population changes of cuckoos between the last 2 breeding atlases. And we found there's a very strong correlation between the degree of local population change and the proportion of birds which take this more dangerous, less successful route via Spain. And this holds across the whole data set, and also, interestingly, both within lowland and upland birds. So this gave us quite strong evidence, together with the difference in survival, that the use of this route was contributing, at least over and above conditions in the UK, to the population decline that we've been observing. And this shows the mortality locations of birds taking that southwestern route, and you can see that a number of them died in Spain before initiating the Sahara crossing. And in years where the droughts and wildfires that occur in Spain in some years, well, there's always a dry period, but when the droughts were particularly severe and there were extensive wildfires, none of the birds which migrated via Spain survived to reach tropical Africa at all. Sample size is small, so we're continuing with this work to work out exactly what's going on, but that is the general picture. And I think that's me pretty much done, but I would like to say thanks, as well as a thanks to you all for listening. Thank you to all these people from the BTO and beyond who have been pretty much instrumental in allowing this project to, well, all these projects to go on, because they're big team efforts requiring input from lots of people. So thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. It was so fascinating to hear the background. You know, I've seen on the BTO website that the cuckoo tracking, and that was a fantastic run through of some of the detail, which I'm sure, you know, many people found really fascinating. And I just wanted to say that there's an opportunity for questions now, and no question is too daft. So if you will have any question that you'd like to ask Chris, and I will not be passing judgment on that was a daft question, but really we had a bit of naturalist nerdy talk at the beginning, but the purpose of this forum is that we're all sharing and we're all learning. So I just wondered if anyone had any questions for Chris. I haven't seen any in the chat. Do you want to stop the screen sharing? Oh, Matthew.
Yeah, I was struck about what you said about swifts and swallows. Observation personally just looks as though swallows are diminishing, and so are swifts. Are swallows actually doing okay?
They are actually, yeah. They're not red listed or amber listed, even they haven't undergone a big population decline. In fact, I don't think they've been declining at all in recent decades. The reasons for that are unclear, I would say. I mean, some of their foods, so the insect declines is an obvious possibility as to why birds like swallows and swifts would be impacted. But we know that in a recent study that some of the foodstuffs which swallows take a lot of, like aphids, actually are doing fairly well in a lot of regions. So swallows are doing a lot better than swifts. The causes of decline of swift aren't clear either. Obviously, a big contributor is thought to be lack of nest sites, so people modernising roofs, etc. But that's probably only part of the story. So insect declines are very much likely to be impacting swifts, not necessarily just in the UK, but also in the stopovers that they make en route here on the way back from Africa as well. So yeah.
So we've got some lovely questions in the chat. Laura asked, are the migration maps available online? And the residents of Huntingdonshire will be very interesting. I'm sure the residents of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough are very interested.
Yeah. Well, the cookies are online, so they're updated twice a day, I think, certainly once a day. That's www.bto.org/cuckoos. I'll put that in the chat afterwards. Some of the other, around that area of the website, I can't exactly give you the address. There are some of the other maps are there for some species. And we're also, we're about to submit a paper on nightingale migration, and then that'll become available on our website once that's been published. But certainly the main one that you can follow, because of the size of the cuckoos and the ability to track them with satellite tags, is the cuckoo, which you can follow live on the BTO website.
Brilliant. And then I think a final question on this. I don't see any further hands, but I see in the chat Anna McMahon has asked, what can we best do as local citizens to support endangered birds?
What could, oh gosh, as locals, well, carrying out, joining in with BTO surveys is a very good way to start to help, because it provides us the information that we need to understand what's going on with population decline. So BBS, and even people who aren't particularly proficient, BTO provides training courses these days, which enables people to get up to speed. So it's always worth looking to see what you can do. Garden bird watch as well. There are more practical things as well. So although we don't know that it's necessarily the main cause of the decline, putting up things like swift boxes and then playing attraction calls to get them established on your house is not only a fun thing to do, but actually it's certainly not going to do the population any harm, and it's very likely to be helping the population. But yeah, all those normal, I say normal, all those things, but gardens as well. I mean, there's things we could do in our gardens, etc., and just supporting conservation as general, I suppose, is the obvious ones.
And I misled you that was the final question, because we've just also got one from Martin Dole, our chair, which says, do we have any idea at all why birds, cuckoos, take a southwest as opposed to a southeast route?
Sorry, so do we have any idea
why the cuckoos go one way or the other way? When you showed that migration map with the red and the yellow going sort of
sure. Why do those two routes exist? So we know that it looks like, based on the limited information we have from other populations in Europe, and also from the initial results of genetic studies, that we basically got a hybrid zone. So birds in southern France, western France, probably taking mostly the western route, and we know that in Northern Europe, say from England eastwards, most of all the birds, in fact, are taking the southeastern route. So it looks like we probably had cuckoos from Northern Europe invading originally, and so all of our cuckoos migrated southeast via Italy, and then subsequently cuckoos from sort of Western France, maybe the Low Countries even, have invaded, and that's given us a mixture of the two. So it's like it's genetically controlled, is I suppose the short answer to that. As far as we can tell, although as yet our colleagues in Munich who are doing the genetics haven't been able to identify the precise genetic element.
Thank you. And I also see a final hand doing really well here, from Roger Mitchell. Did you have a question as well?
Yes, thanks, Pamela. Chris, I was in Malta a week ago, and I was pleased to hear from senior people there that the shooting and trapping of birds is declining. We know it's been a big problem around the Mediterranean. What do your records show? That how the migrants are being affected. Is this actually helping now with the ECA regulations cutting in and declining shooting? Can you detect this?
Not yet, as far as I'm aware. So it's been a debate as to how much shooting is responsible for the recent population declines we've seen in various species. As far as I'm aware, that was unlikely. My thoughts were it's unlikely to be the case because shooting hadn't increased in the timing where the population trend had gone from relatively positive to more negative. But a decline in shooting, I would, as you're asking, I don't know of it, but I would expect that to have a beneficial effect. So it can only be good news, particularly spring migration shooting. Hopefully we will see an impact on that, but I'm not aware of that as yet.
Thanks, Chris.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. That was a fascinating, action-packed talk that I'm sure we've all enjoyed. So thank you very much. And I'd now like to move on to our next speaker, which is Rob Mungovan from the Wild Trout Trust. He even actually voted a wild trout hero, I read on your website. And Rob is a conservation officer for the East of England with the Wild Trout Trust, a passionate riverman, a campaigner for river conservation and trout, and a trout fisher. And has worked as an ecologist for South Cambridgeshire District Council before then. And Rob is going to talk to us about a perspective on chalk streams, which is a very hot topic at the moment. So very welcome. And then hopefully we'll have some time for not just questions, but perhaps an interactive debate about this afterwards. So handing over to you, Rob.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Are you hearing me loud and clear? And first of all, are you seeing the value of chalk streams presentation? Great. So then, as I've been introduced, yes, I've got a bit of background in this county, in this area, and now I'm lucky enough to work for one of the charities that take care of my favourite fish, the wild brown trout. So first of all, the little view you're looking at there, that's one of the chalk streams that's most precious to me. It's the River Shep, running through my village of Shepworth. It's my home patch. I'm very fortunate to have taken care of that river for just about 25 years now. And I've learned a huge amount from being a hands-on naturalist and observing things, which is what many people don't get to see. It's the same places time and time again. It can also bring some sad thoughts as well, having seen these habitats 30 years ago and seeing how they are now. There's definitely been a downward decline. So my organisation, the Wild Trout Trust, we use the wild brown trout as a flagship species to inspire everyone to get involved in their conservation. If it's good enough for the brown trout, that means you've got good water quality, you've probably got good water flow, and you've got habitat diversity. The bottom picture there shows a community planting event after we undertook some habitat restoration work on the lower River Shep down near Barrington, and really getting the community out to plant, get involved hands-on can be a great way to bring habitat improvement projects to conclusion. So at the Wild Trout Trust, we share information on the latest science affecting trout. We get involved in partnership projects. One which I'm going to talk on today will catch the ear of two people here from Baben Research Campus. So listen out, Chris and Matt, I've seen you in the audience. And we basically try and make sure that people know why it's important to conserve the wild genetics of the diverse population of brown trout that we have in the UK. We do not need to stock fish. If we create the right habitats, work from the bottom up, these rivers will take care of them. And the fantastic thing about chalk streams is that you can see everything that's going on in them. That bottom picture there shows basically the colour variation of our wild brown trout at Falmere Nature Preserve, again in the River Shep. They're all different. We do not need to put in domesticated, stocked, reared fish. So then, let's look at a beautiful chalk stream. This is the Bourne rivulet, a tributary of the River Test. What I didn't ask is how I get the pointer up. Red pen and laser point. Pen. Yes, there we go. You see one trout there. That's because this is a wild fishery. It's not stocked. It's not overpopulated with trout. You've got one big dominant trout there. We've also got silt in a chalk stream. Unusual. We've got trees coming right down to the edges. This is more of a wild, more of a shaggy chalk stream. But in common with all chalk streams, it's that crystal clear water that allows the sunlight through the water column to drive the plant production. It's also really important that our chalk streams have a stable flow, so they don't tend to be prone to large destructive flood events. They have pretty much the same bank levels throughout the year. They don't have a large fluctuation in the water height or the volume of flow. But then it's also that mineral content, the dissolved minerals that allow different organisms, whether they be plants or animals, find the minerals that their structures need to support their growth. So chalk streams really are a stable environment, something that we can see what's going on, which makes us become attracted to them. But what many people don't realize is that nearly all of our chalk streams are man-made. And by man-made, I mean they might have been realigned in the river valley to follow a contour level, to take the energy to a water mill. They might have been channeled to drain an old area of fen to increase land productivity. They've all been manipulated in some way by man, which also makes quite a challenging question when we bring forward the idea of habitat restoration. Which period in their time are we restoring them to? Do we want this crystal clear, quality, modern chalk stream environment? Or do we want them to be something like a wet fen oozing across the river valley? So where are our Cambridgeshire chalk streams? This extract is taken from 2019 when it showed the River Shep, the Hoffer Brook and the Wendon's Ambrose stream as the three in my part of the catchment that still had good ecological status. Sadly, they're now all failing because there are other criteria brought in. It's these forever chemicals and some of the compounds associated with fire runoff that are basically affecting nearly all of our watercourses. But the point is, we can bring about habitat restoration. We can improve the ecological status of watercourses, and I'll get onto that later. There's a bit of a sad account of how our rivers are at the moment, but the potential for their restoration is there. So what have the chalk streams given to us here in Cambridge? Well, we know Hobson's conduit that enabled people to live healthily with clean water in good quantities. They channeled that water so that people didn't suffer from cholera. We provided drinking pumps to our parishes. Some of those pumps, you literally had to pump them. Others simply tapped into that artesian pressure and the water bubbles up, as this one still flows in the village of Wadden. But at the same time, we know that not everything is good. Tony Eva made his fantastic film and brought the issue really quite forward into the Cambridge area, that we know that we are taking too much water from the environment to supply our daily needs, supply our industry, to supply agriculture. But the question is, what are we going to leave for the environment? Should we allow our rivers to be sucked dry most years? How are we really going to address that issue? The supply and demand is increasing. Rather, the demand is increasing. But then we need to remember that the rivers enabled man to achieve the population density that we're at now. Water mills were a source of energy. They enabled us to grind and crush our food sources so they're more palatable for us. Top picture here, Bullbeck Mill in Barrington on the River Ree. The River Ree was once a beautiful chalk stream. It's rather suffering now, but it had very stable flow. This mill here was the last operating water mill in the Cam Valley. That's Hawkston Mill. Rather sorry state of what it once was now. And in this fantastic book, produced in the early 1970s by the Barrington Historical Society, they documented well over 10 mills in the River Ree Valley. You contrast that to the Clay River, excuse me, contrast that to the Clay River of the Bourne Brook, where the flows would be flashy and unreliable. I can only think of one mill on that river system. That was at Toft. So the chalk streams provided us with an easy to manipulate and use source of water that provided lots of energy for milling purposes, which enabled us to support higher population density. There were also water meadows. People often think of the classic floated water meadows that you see in Hampshire and Wiltshire and don't think we had them here in Cambridgeshire. That's not quite the way. The water meadows are really a complex agricultural system for improving productivity. Getting that ground warm in the spring meant that the grass grew earlier. That gave it that early bite. You could get your sheep fatter, you could send them up to London quicker, you could get more money for them ahead of everybody else. But also the sheep and corn system, that's where the sheep were brought onto the water meadows to eat the lush grass. And then the sheep were taken back up onto the higher ground or the less productive ground where they defecated, urinated, and naturally fertilized some of those upland reaches. So you got this kind of natural fertilization system. So people in the 17th century realized that water meadows, rivers could be part of increasing their agricultural productivity. And this is kind of what they look like from above. Who's seen that in the Cambridgeshire landscape? Well, with drones now, you can get out and see it. I haven't got a drone picture yet, but this is a floated water meadow in the valley of the River Ree. This network of drainage channels here, this is the River Ree here, this is the A10, Harston Mill is just here, the Hoffer Brook here. You have drainage channels going underneath the Hoffer Brook, which would have supplied this water meadow system to enable the grass to be irrigated. It then drained underneath the River Ree and around Harston Mill. Quite a complex system. So people thought it was worth establishing water meadows in Cambridgeshire, and there's also some in the valley of the River Granter too. Of course, rivers, particularly chalk streams where people can see what's in them, would have provided our ancestors with food. These kind of structures, I'm not going to say what it is yet. It's not a mill. It has a series of traps inside it. Those traps and grills caught eels. We all know that Ely was famous for its eels, but I can say that there were people in Foxton who were also catching eels. There was a man who proudly had an eel trident in his front garden in Foxton, where I grew up, and he found it in the Foxton Brook. Also, Roland Parker, a famous Foxton historian, also wrote a section in that book that I referenced, the Camel Ree, where after the River Ree had been dredged, he found a number of implements, sharpened axe head-like implements that he think were there for cutting fishing nets free, and also with clunch sinking weights. The people were taking food and resources from our chalk stream valleys. They were supplying us with energy and food and water. But they can also bring us wealth. We all know that there's famous fishing down in the Hampshire valleys on the rivers Test and Itchen. That's a picture of the Itchen. Maybe not so much for fishing at Shepperth Mill and Trout Farm. They tried, but it was a water decline. It's that lack of steady flow that also put their business. But imagine if people want to come and fish in high-class rivers and pay a lot of money, that has the knock-on effect of supporting hospitality, riverkeeper jobs, fishing guide jobs, and also keeps your local economy and shops buoyant. And then our chalk streams have just given us beauty. To put it quite simply, if you've seen a chalk stream river in the back end of May, early June, awash with water crowfoot flowers, it's a sight to behold. It's just one of those things you go, yeah, that's a moment in time. It's something of, typical English countryside beauty. But in our rivers, our chalk streams, you might also see these bright green cushion-like plants, water starwort, that are harbouring large brown trout hiding behind them. And that plant diversity supports one of our declining mammals, the water voles. Stable environment, lush growth of plants, ideal habitat for the water vole. But you might find things much more interesting, like the dendritic form of freshwater sponge. That used to grow in the River Shep on the railway culvert. I've also seen it on the bridge footings at Hawkston Mill many years ago, though I don't think it's there in recent times. So there are still strange things to be found. And then people also say, go sit by a river. It's good for your soul. It will inspire you. Well, Lord Byron got inspired from swimming in the River Cam at Byron's Pool. I think that site's rather a letdown now, sadly. Good for the soul, place to relax. This little image there is the Hoffer Brook. It's a place I've known all my life. But to be quite honest, it makes me slightly sad now because I know that change may be coming to that spot. That may be affected by the east-west rail. They may have to widen the rail corridor at that point. What will be left of that small little stream? So there's lots of pressures, lots of problems coming upon our watercourses. We know that we've got abstraction problems. Falmey Nature Reserve, to the left of that image, the springs are completely dry. And you can see the water augmentation being pumped in. Thank goodness the Environment Agency are able to support artificially our rivers. But that isn't sustainable, we know. And don't tell us that we're getting less rainfall. It's been incredibly wet this year. But let's see how water resources are come September of this year. We know that we've got water quality problems on some of our streams. This is the River Granter, right? Almost completely supported by treated effluents in the summers of 2019 and 2020. We know that we're going to have more discharges into our watercourses as we have more urban developments going on. We know that we've got excessive shade, where people have said, don't cut those trees back. Well, if you don't get light to our chalk streams, you have nothing to drive the photosynthesis in the plant communities that are so important. And if we don't have those rivers being flushed out by good flows, they silt up. Siltation is a real significant problem on chalk rivers because it's those gaps between the gravel particles, which is where many of our invertebrates live. It's those gaps between the gravel particles that hold the eggs of brown trout, sorry. We know we've got invasive species coming along. Himalayan balsam getting bigger and bigger, possibly enriched by phosphate effluents in our watercourses. We know we've got signal crayfish marching up our streams. There are people who still use herbicide on our rivers, kill off the natural beauty. And we know that in these hotter summers, we're getting algal blooms in our watercourses. Not good. So what's most threatened? It's the things that don't fly. It's the things that don't have the ability to jump or to swim up hard, raging floodwaters to get over structures, which I'll come to. So we have brook lampreys, stone loach, spined loach, bullhead, and the native crayfish. It may still be in our Cambridgeshire rivers. This one was found in the River Cam at Ickleton in 2014 when some old willow tree roots were removed from the river. There may still be relic populations. So those things don't jump. Then this one, this is the Crenoba alpina that made Ninewells Nature Reserve famous until the drought of 1976 caused that species to disappear and Ninewells lost its SSSI status. So that species would have been there since the last ice age. That species would have been there in those springs, stable water flow, stable temperature, everything was just right for it until we sucked too much water out and diminished its habitat to the point it can never return. I've touched on more barriers, or barriers being a problem. People think fish jump. No, they don't, they swim. This is the River Ree at the Barrington-Foxton Road Bridge. That is an impoundment, a barrier, stopping the migration of minnows, chub, dace, probably even brown trout. They could try and jump, but there's no pool there. There's no way they can get momentum to basically to shoot themselves up that. So less water means more barriers. And ironically, the Environment Agency have to measure the flow in our watercourses, and some of their structures, their gauging stations, become barriers. Pamela, I was told I could speak for longer, so I've gone slower. I'm keeping my eye on it. If I try and wrap up for about 20 minutes or so, start waving at me if you need me to. So part of the work that Wild Trout Trust does is we can walk a watercourse, we can write reports for people, and we can point out the good and the bad. That's our advisory visit service. We can then take that advisory visit service, we can walk the watercourse and come up with a project plan. I've done that for the Baben Research Campus. They now employ me to get out there and take their staff members and to get them involved in their conservation of their river granta through their site. And I've also undertaken a more significant habitat improvement project with them, which we delivered in April 2021. And most importantly, we got some floodplain reconnection back. And I'll show you some examples of that. We can make space for water. This is just a nettle bed. It can be graded out. You can make shallow bays at the sides of rivers, so you've got more online water storage when that river comes up in flood. We can slow the flow by placing trees across the water. Trees naturally fall into rivers. They're an important component. Slow that flow, hold back that flood water, allow that water to flood out onto its floodplain. Flows go down, the water moves on. We can regrade the riverbed. We can bring up gravels to make that bed undulate, to go up and down as well as side to side. We can reshape the river so that the public can be connected to it once again. This has now been wildflower seeded and is an attractive walk through their site. We can put gravel bars back in to create these spawning areas for fish, for brown trout, for minnows, dace and chub. We can find the river again. Keep your eye on these 3 trees at the back there, completely hidden by that stand of brambles. But there's actually quite a nice little part of the River Granta about hidden underneath there. Floodplain reconnection. My wife is kindly standing where I created an engineered lowered dip. When the river floods, the river's able to connect back to this low risk area, an area of wet woodland. Why wouldn't somebody allow that area to flood? It's not causing anybody any problems, but most importantly, some of that flood water gets onto the land where it's able to infiltrate and help to aquifer recharge. That's something that we think is missing, is urgently needed in parts of the Granta catchment. We can also make the river better for people. Footbridges will always attract people and dogs. People and dogs wear out the banks. You get lots of slopes, high input of silt. That silt can then clog the river gravels and degrade the habitat. We can regrade those banks back. We can make beach-like features so people have got somewhere clean and attractive. If people are not connected to their rivers, why should they care? I think it's really important for people to understand and learn to love their rivers, really. And so some of my final images is the Holy Trinity is what Charles Rangeley calls this. What supports a healthy chalk stream? You've got to have natural flow. You've got to have clean water and natural habitats. The stronger or bigger those 3 components are, the healthier and more resilient your chalk stream will be. Take away natural flow and you haven't even got a river. Take away good water quality and you might have a river, but it's probably not healthy. You could have the best water quality, you could have a lot of it, but if it's flowed in a concrete channel, it wouldn't really be a chalk stream. So all of those 3 factors have to come together to make you a healthy chalk stream. My final slide, Pamela. What will the future bring? Are we to expect more of this as our summers maybe get hotter, but we use more and more water? This is the River Granta at Stapleford in 2019. The bottom of the river was dry. The top end was wet, fortunate for the water being pumped in. Are we to see our tourists punting on an effluent river? I don't think they knew really what they were punting on. Take away the good water quality, take away the good water quantity, and we don't really have a river cam anymore. We've exposed gravels. But we can work together. I've said many of these species will respond positively to habitat restoration. And this is why I'm showing Cambridge Water Company's logo and the Wildlife Trust. I've worked with them to place gravel in the River Mell. This is the River Mell near the back of Meldriff Church. Good connectivity, the River Ree, put the gravel in, and really a month later, very good wild brown trout, about 45 centimeters long, were spawning on that habitat. Make it, connect it, and they will probably come. So we can have a very positive outcome for certain species, but without the good water quality, quantity, and habitat, some of these species won't be as abundant as we would expect them to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. That was amazing and inspirational. And I live in Stapleford, so I'm very familiar with that. And I was actually out with the Granter and East Cambridge farm cluster
Yes.
last week, looking at some of these interventions on the Granter and having conversations with the Wildlife Trust too, and all of the about 15 farmers who were present about what they could all do collectively and how they
That's
can't
the word,
do
yeah.
these things individually, because if
Yep.
you do something at some point, then you'll actually be holding back too much water from the villages above. But if everyone just lets it flow out, then you know that means that you've got the flooding downstream and you don't have enough of that water quantity and quality.
That's it.
That was
And do you remember the times when the Little Rose pub in Stapleford would get flooded?
Definitely, it was actually a couple of weeks ago.
Did it get...
And yeah, and the whole
Oh, right.
the footpath to the school as well, at Sawston was flooded as well.
Right.
And that bit that you created, I've fallen over there. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
that lovely bit of outfall
Dip.
of the stream.
Yeah.
It was definitely a wellies territory. So yeah, brilliant. And we now have an opportunity for a conversation actually that follows on from this. And I know I'm really interested to hear you know, thoughts. We've got one question in the chat from Rupert Pierce-Gould, which we could start off with, and then maybe have an open discussion. I'm really interested in your views about this, whether you know you're a chalk streams expert, you know, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a member of the public who's rocked up for these you know, hear this amazing talk from Rob and from Chris. So all views are very welcome in here, and do use the participant button to kind of raise your hand if you want to talk, or the chat. So the question in the chat is, what percentage of treated water can our chalk streams take before the brown trout and biodiversity move away?
Yeah, I don't know, Rupert. I saw that question coming up. I think the issue really is water temperature and oxygen concentration. So the River Grant that I showed there, that's the wild trout fishery at Hildesham. We thought they were going to lose trout in that summer, but they didn't lose a single one. So somehow those trout managed to hunker down. I'm hoping they probably just stayed at the bottom of the pool where the water temperature is cooler. They probably stopped feeding. Maybe some of their biological processes slowed down and they just endured it. I simply couldn't say, but it will come down to concentration of oxygen, which will be one of the limiting factors, and temperature. But it's a rather sad thought that some of our fish are swimming in treated sewage effluent. But thank goodness it is treated, and we're not getting the high amounts of sewage dumping in our watercourses that other parts of the country are suffering.
Definitely, and we've got from a sort of a question from Elizabeth in the chat. Can't we work harder to get people to stop using so much water?
We
I mean,
can.
probably not
We
quite
can,
in your
and Cambridge
area. It's
Water
kind of in
Company
all of
doing
our
it.
areas to answer
But
that, isn't it? Really,
it comes down to people caring, and if people don't care, they've got to be priced out. And somebody did say that maybe there should be a 2-tariff sort of payment system on water, so that people are allowed to use, say, up to 80 litres at a lower cost for their essential needs. But if you want to start using higher volumes of water, then you should start to pay a premium price for that. I know that Ofwat are very concerned that people of lower incomes aren't finding water as a high cost. But certainly those people who are watering their lawns in the height of summer, washing their cars, jet washing their driveways, could probably afford to pay for that extra water use, and they probably wouldn't give a damn anyway. So we've got to find ways to positively encourage people to reduce water and effectively financially control, I think, because that's money talk. But we've got to use less water because there's going to be more people around here.
And I noticed, well, I've noticed we've got 3 questions. I noticed also we've got Charlotte along from the Elia News catchment, so very welcome to join. So I'll do it in hand order. Roger, you put your hand up first.
Thanks, Rob. I really enjoyed your talk. You showed us one slide where I think it was a sort of natural recharge of the aquifer by some excavation at the side of the river. I presume there's a lot more potential in this. I know there's one landowner who said that he thought that this should be something that the farmers should be encouraged to do and probably get, you know, government subsidies. What are your thoughts on both natural and artificial recharge of the chalk aquifer to get these partly to get these streams going again?
I think it should be natural. I'm actually quite concerned about artificial. From my understanding, artificial recharge is basically pumping some water down into there, and you don't really know what you're pumping down. I think we need to rely more on the river's natural processes, the biological control of certain compounds, for getting them to adhere to clay particles, for biological control and diminishing. But if we just think we can pump stuff into the ground, I think we're onto dangerous territory. We run the risk of potentially damaging or polluting our aquifers, and once it's down there, who knows what that could result in. So I think we've got the landscape. It's worked for millennia. Why don't we just use that process? You know, the bacteria there, the fungi there, the soils are there. I think we've got to be careful about how much we feel we can always find an engineered solution. And I know that in the Cambridge area, when the water crisis is being talked of, people say, how can we design ourselves out of this? It might simply be, we've got to make space. We've got to let the natural processes run. It's worked for millennia, and it could continue to work for millennia if we allow the space and time.
And I think certainly that the grantor farmers are looking at that kind of flood meadow expansion and what they can do. And I certainly think that the new farm incentive payments that have kind of changed it and really increased around the, you know, the flood meadow could make a difference. It could make, you know, because whatever is done has to fit with a farm productivity and profitability. And so if this can be one of the services that a farm is delivering alongside, you know, delivering food, then, you know, delivering water feels like a really important thing.
Yeah, Pamela, there's just been announced, I think, the farm incentive payments for £1,200 per hectare for floodplain and habitat and river reconnection. So that seems to me is quite a large payment, especially if that was wet ground that wasn't very easy to farm in most years. So the farmers may start to be rewarded for encouraging floodplain reconnection.
I mean, I was with the grantor and ooze farmers as well, looking at that and saying, well, this field floods, you know, 3 years out of 5, and before they've tried to make it productive because it hasn't worked with the incentives, but actually with the incentives now that makes that a viable deliverable. And certainly the farmers along the Ouse Valley, appreciating that's not a chalk stream, but, you know, rivers are important, but also along the Granter and the Cam, are very, very aware of that. Right, I'm just going to go to our next question. We've also got lovely. Peter.
We in Natural Cambridgeshire have been having various meetings with DEFRA, the water companies, Environment Agency and others to try to improve the water situation. One chilling piece of information we got at one of those meetings is that 10% of toilets leak, and not just a little bit, 200 to 400 litres a day. So if everybody can do something about their toilet, it would help a lot.
Excellent. That's one of those, what can people do? Fantastic. Right. Next is Stephen, Cam Valley Forum.
Thank you. I just wanted to make 1 or 2 observations. Cam Valley Forum has been pushing water saving methods, and we've got things on our website which you can look at and learn from. I really want to ask Rob a question. I think one of the things I feel Cambridgeshire and Cambridge people need is a absolutely perfect chalk stream to look at, to take the children to. I think there is an opportunity of doing that on the Granter. And what I would like Natural Cambridgeshire to do is to persuade the Cambridge Water Company to use their abstraction reduction credits to save one river first at a time. It could be done possibly on the Granter best first, and then I think we would be gaining hugely from it. You cannot expect the Granter to be a decent chalk stream if you're taking 10 megalitres per day from that chalk. 10 megalitres is 4 Olympic swimming pools per day from that tiny little stream. It's just not right, and it's not fair. We've got to do something about it.
I agree, Stephen. We've spoken about this quite a bit in the past, and the Granter is one of the only chalk streams that hasn't been radically changed along its whole length. The Shep is unnatural. Many parts of the Mell are unnatural. The Hoffer Brook is partly unnatural. The Ree Valley has been moved. The path to the Granter, we've still got a wide, hard-bedded gravel chalk stream with gently shelving banks in places. And we know that the Cambridge water abstraction is directly affecting it. And we know, or we believe, that they could ease back on some of those pumps, and it'd be a fascinating exercise to see how it could recover. And remember the slide that I showed showing the River Granter dry at the bottom? That's completely back to front. The Chalk Valley should be at its wettest at its bottom end. That's where the downhill accumulation of all of that water should be building up. But we'd sucked the River Granter Valley so dry, it was not even holding water at the bottom. That's the sad, desperate state that River Granter's got itself into. But if you look at it today, it's chugging through nicely. The Granter it's got gradient, which means it's got stream power. It's got the potential to drive natural processes to start its own restoration. If we just give it back its water flow, it could respond amazingly.
Brilliant. Brilliant, thank you. And certainly, you know, Natural Cambridgeshire, but also we have the local nature recovery strategy, which we're going to hear about from Gabriella as our final talk. But that's a real opportunity to prioritise both habitats such as chalk streams and actions or measures to what we can do to conserve and recover nature in them. So there's a real kind of strategic opportunity that the public the public engagement at the moment is ongoing for. I'd like to come to SL next. Welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for an excellent presentation, Rob. That was really fascinating. It was just a little bit more of a response to the question about how we can improve water efficiency and reduce water usage in domestic settings. The Environment Agency has been doing quite a lot of work with the water companies and the local planning authorities in Cambridgeshire, and also with the, apologies, there's somebody doing building work upstairs. If you just bear with me, I'll ask if he can just.
Excellent.
The water conservation issues, it's something we have to just keep repeating, because in the middle of this wettest winter, who will really be thinking about water conservation? Who will be thinking about turning their taps off when they're brushing their teeth? It's a message that has to just keep put out there all the time.
It's a difficult message to get across, Rob. You're quite right. And Peter made an excellent point as well about leaky loos. So there's a lot of public information and communication that needs to happen to get people to prioritise and understand water. But the piece of work that we've been doing with the water companies is pulling together data and evidence for the local planning authorities to use in their work with the developers to encourage more water efficient dwellings. So that reducing the per capita daily consumption of water for something like 135 litres per person per day, I think it is, but trying to aim to get that down to something more like 85. You need to have particular local evidence for that to happen, for that to become a requirement. But we're working hard with them and with DEFRA and DLUC at the moment to try and ensure that those water efficient dwellings are being constructed.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And I'd like to bring in Tim Brightmeyer, one of Natural Cambridgeshire's trustees, but also the lead landowner for the Granter Farm cluster.
Thank you, Pamela. I'd just like to highlight this business of water recharge and what we are looking to do here. We haven't, I would say, made total progress yet, but I think it's on the way. We've looked at two different forms of modelling now. One which shows that we've got some here at Bartlett, where we've got some quite weak chalk strata along the river valley floor, and that is certainly one area which we're looking at to see whether recharge might be possible there by effectively just digging a hole which has a chalk bottom. You capture the water. Probably this season we would have captured water 10 times at least. And then it drains through the bottom of the chalk, hopefully over a period of time, and then you refill it again. Interestingly, there is another set of modelling which shows that possibly the better place to do this is actually on the shoulders of the valley where the chalk is closer to the surface. And funnily enough, when my dog walks around the farm, I know almost to within about 20 yards on each ditch that flows off the high ground, where the water suddenly disappears out of the ditch into the chalk aquifer. 20 yards up the ditch, it's still flowing with water. 20 yards down, it's dry as a bone. So we're looking at where the best model is to do that, and certainly hope to try and see whether we can get at least a trial in place by next winter. But the other thing which concerns me significantly is the whole business of the water quality, particularly where it comes to sewage works. I have 3 sewage works which discharge onto my farm from villages, and that's the only source of water coming down the Granted during the summer. And by the time it gets halfway across my farm, that water has disappeared, and it's only gone one place. It's gone into the aquifer, and we know from testing that Cam Valley have done that the phosphate levels are very high, and therefore we would really like the Environment Agency and Anglian Water to look at the idea of at least once again trialling settlement pits and reed beds. And then my final point, which actually really concerns me, is the business of environmental support. 20% of the water that's used, taken out of the Granter aquifer, apparently is for environmental support. And this is code for what I think was called the ELU's transfer system, whereby they pump the aquifer high up in the catchment, take it on a pipe across my farm and put it back in the river again. And I know for a fact that over the last 40 years, that has drained the aquifer significantly more. And if we're going to make the Granter a showcase example, I wonder whether we should think about stopping that transfer system. I don't know whether the Environment Agency would like to come back to me about that, but it's just a thought.
Wow,
anyway, that's a quick rundown.
I'll speak up because I've said in public forums, if it wasn't for this water support network, we wouldn't even be talking about chalk streams in Cambridgeshire today. If they hadn't had those support networks in place from the early 90s, when we started to get the drier summers, we'd have lost our chalk streams 30 years ago. It's unsustainable, but we've got ourselves into this sticky and dangerous or perilous situation. And yes, it is something like 20% of the water abstracted in the Cambridge catchment by Cambridge Water Companies and used to support to mitigate the impacts of abstraction. So it's a bit of a strange situation.
Okay, well, that's helpful. The answer is we just need to try and capture more and put it back into the aquifer. That's great. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. And Sue Wells, obviously got WCPA Marine, but I think you're also with the Friends of Terrington Brook more locally. So Sue, do come in.
Sorry. Okay, I don't know if you see me. Sorry, I hadn't realised what I was labelled with, and I'm supposed to, like you, Pamela, I think we're supposed to be on another call at the moment. But just to say, I'm representing Friends of Terrington Brook here, and I thought it was a great talk by Rob. I just wanted to emphasise Stephen's point. We won't have time to explore that more. The idea of making the Granter, a proper chalk stream and sort of investing resources there has been around for a long time, and everybody seems to be in favour of it. I can't really understand why we're not pushing ahead to do that. I have great hopes of this nature recovery thing, but I mean, we seem to have been spending all our time doing strategies and project proposals rather than actually doing the stuff. And having been involved in chalk streams now in Cambridge for well over 10 years, I'm getting a little bit frustrated, and I do think if we can push the grantor idea, if everybody seems to think that's a really good place to start, can we not get going with it? I feel I want to, you know, put some coins in a hat towards it, because it doesn't seem to me that we're really making progress.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, you can come back. Certainly, I felt a real kind of urgency and a sort of collective will to do something amongst the grantor farmers when I was out, which I'm sure Tim can testify to. But yeah, and the funding seems to be better now and in place from both the water companies and from DEFRA. But yeah, Rob, do you have a perspective on that?
I don't have anything much more to say other than trying not to really speak for the water company. I think they're probably, knowing that they've got a finite amount of water, are being very cautious over their resource. If they agree to cut a pump and we have a dry summer where public consumption and demand goes right up, they might need to call on all of their resources, and it gets them into a very awkward situation. I'm not really justifying it for them, but they've got a business and they've got an obligation to supply all of us as customers. So it has to be customer demand that has to go down. But how on earth is that going to happen when we're going to have so many more people in this area? That is the problem. We can all use less, but we know that demand is going to go up as we have hundreds of thousands more people around here. So Cambridge Water Company probably wondering where they're going to end up until the reservoir is built.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. And I'm going to go to Charlotte Stannard next. And Charlotte has also put a link in the chat about a Rivers Trust online conference on 16th of April on buffer zones. And I'm sure Peter will be willing to share that when he shares around the recording as well. So thank you, Charlotte, and do come in, do join the debate.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, my name's Charlotte Stannard, and I'm the project officer for the Cam and Elues Catchment Partnership, the aim of which is to encourage everybody to collaborate around water environment improvement. Great presentation, Rob, very inspiring. I thought that was wonderful. And I wanted to say, I mean, there's so much that we could say, but I think that the sort of one of the toughest things is getting the message out to people about using less water, because we are one of the highest per person usage in Europe. And I think the message coming from the water companies gets lost because they're the wrong people to spread that message. So Rob Marta had a very good idea that we should all get together, all of our comms teams. And we had an initial meeting with a few organisations and their comms teams, and everyone was really behind it. And if we could get a piece of money, a bit of funding to try and drive a project around some messaging that, you know, everybody needs a water butt, you know, and everyone needs to be doing X, Y, and Z. And as I said, you know, we all need to come together to get that message out. And just to say that Cameo is at the starting point of developing a subcatchment plan for the CAM. So if anybody has any data that they can send, any statistics or information, please send it across to me. And if you want to get involved in a sort of core planning group, please get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Anything you want to come back to them, Rob? I mean, I'd like to point people out. There's some very good debates going along in the chat. If always trickier to see these things if you're joining on a mobile, but some very good conversations about how we might do this. Certainly when I lived in Broadland in Norfolk, which was very near lots of chalk streams, they prioritised the free giving of water butts to those who were in the catchments of the chalk streams, you know, Wensum, the Tudd and those, which was an interesting council initiative. You know, they really wanted to sort of target reduction by taking action, and Quinton has put in some things in the chat. I might bring you in a bit, Quinton, as well, if you would like. And Matthew, we'll just go to you now as you've got your hand up.
Yes, I just want to pick up the point that Rob is saying. You know, there's so many people here, therefore we won't have enough water for population. I may be wrong on this, but if I take the water flow in a year across the whole eastern area in catchment, there is enough water coming through that area during the year for us to provide enough water for the whole population. The problem we have is, first of all, we obviously have from the aquifers, we have a quite limited amount of water that we can take from that, and that's got to be sort of managed much better. But there's enough water through the ooze and the Neen, and actually I just thought through the Cam, if it is held and then managed in the whole year. It's not as though we're talking what they have in China, which is where the rivers actually run dry during the whole year. So the question is, how do we get the reservoirs not, I mean, yes, we have to make sure we manage it better, but we must deal with the question of reservoirs. And I'm working on this with Peter and a number of other farmers, that if in fact we can create more water held in the land, there's enough water. Okay, and let's think about that. Obviously, we've got to make sure we've got to manage the aquifers much better than we have been. But it is a question of storage. And how do we do that? And at the moment, we have everything based upon fantastically high level cost, massive kind of projects, which will all run too late. So work I'm looking at the moment is really working with the farmers to build up reservoirs in their land, because farmers typically can build a reservoir in about sort of 3 years, rather than the 15 to 20 years that we're talking about in terms of Chatteris. And that is a basis. If I look at what happens in Australia, that actually is how the water market works in Australia. Much more dry, much drier population area than we are. And they basically have a market, and they buy and sell water, and water is held in the land and sold. And I think the point that you've made about getting the right pricing is very, very correct. I think it's a very good idea of having sort of 80 limit, and then being over that, you've then got to pay a higher price. We have to get to realize that water is a natural resource and it is limited, and we have to manage it better. But it is possible for us to do this. Don't get into a death spiral about thinking we can't have enough population here. There's enough water to make everybody happy, provided we just manage it in a more sensible way.
I'm going to give Rob the final comeback on that kind of very interesting
I wouldn't argue
statement.
with Matthew there. We look at the farming community, they roll up their sleeves, they get on with it. It's their motivation. Look at Russell Smith Farms around here, the farm networks of irrigation they've put in place because they've seen the value of their crops and they know they've got to hold the water. But Matthew's right. These big public projects just take decades to come on board. I do know of a farmer who said he wanted to retain some more water on some land in South Cambridgeshire. We haven't got many hills, but there's still reservoirs being built in the flat landscape. There's one near Milton, isn't there, where the maze is a great big reservoir. It might not look nice, but it's solving a problem. So we can achieve it. I don't know how it would be tied into the public water supply, but it can be done. I can't deny that, Matthew.
Oh, and I've just noticed that Roger's put up his hand again. Roger, did you want to come in for a final and different comment there, or was that a legacy hand? So you're on mute and I can't see your picture.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Right, here I am. Yes, it's about holding water back. If you have downstream effects and you have estuarine effects, if you hold water back during the winter, the high flows, it affects flows to estuaries. I won't say a lot about this. I did my PhD on this, but the Norwegians hold back about 50% of their snow melt for hydroelectric, and it's dramatically affected the inshore ecology and fisheries in some places. So we have to remember, however we manipulate the environment, there's something going to happen somewhere. So it's obviously we have to balance all these things up. It might suit these chalk streams, but maybe it's not suiting the wash. So we need to look in the round at these things.
An excellent point to end on, and thank you, Rob, for your presentation and stimulating so much discussion here. I think water and chalk streams is a very hot topic, and certainly something that we will be looking at in relation to the local nature recovery strategy, which is how I'm going to bring in Gabriella Yeomans, who tells me she has also she used to work in the flood risk assistant team role, has been out with Rob on some of these chalk streams. Is now the local nature recovery strategy officer, keeping us all in order as we move forward with the development of the local nature recovery strategy. And Gabriella has a presentation and also has some opportunities for final questions as we finish. So Gabriella, over to you if you want to share your screen.
Thank you, Pamela. Can I just check you can hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. I'm just sharing my screen right now. Bear with me. There you go. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Good morning, all, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Pamela. And yes, I did used to work in the flood risk and biodiversity team assistant role at the County Council, and had an opportunity to go out and do some NFM on one of the rivers in Cambridgeshire with Rob many years ago. But it was such a good experience and I really much enjoyed it. So it was great to hear Rob's presentation just now and all the great work that you're doing. So today I'm going to be giving you a ever so quick update and progress on how we're getting on for our local nature recovery strategy in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I appreciate that there may be some people on this call today that actually don't know what a local nature recovery strategy is. So before I do that, I just wanted to give an update on what is an LNRS. So local nature recovery strategies are a system of spatial strategies for nature and environmental improvements, and they are required by law under the Environment Act of 2021. The purpose of these strategies are to identify locations to create or improve habitats that are most likely to provide a good or great benefit for nature, as well as wider environmental benefits. We are required under the Environment Act that each LNRS must contain two components, the first one being a local habitat map, which identifies national conservation areas, local nature reserves, as well as other areas that we've identified and are particularly important for biodiversity. The second component is a statement of biodiversity priorities, which Pamela previously just mentioned, that we will be identifying these priority areas and the potential measures to go alongside them. And the quick conversation that just happened after Rob's presentation, I've been busy jotting down all of the great ideas, and it's really enthusiastic to hear what's going on. And you will have an opportunity at the end of this presentation to provide us with some further ideas, which will hopefully be fed into this statement of biodiversity priorities. Ever so quickly, local nature recovery strategies are part of a wider nature recovery network. Each region in England have been assigned as a responsible authority. So for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, that is the combined authority, but they have contracted this responsibility to the Cambridgeshire County Council, who then have recruited me, and we are working very closely with Pamela and colleagues on developing this strategy for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Ever so quickly on what we are trying to achieve in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, the focus areas that we would like the LNRS to focus on. So I'll just quickly do a whistle-stop tour of these, as you may have already seen this slide in previous presentations that I've done. We want it to be a cross-county collaboration, building on existing assets and expertise. We want the stakeholder engagement to be well-resourced and well done. We want a document that everyone can get behind, but is also building upon existing great work such as the Cambridge Nature Network, as
Gabrielle,
well as
I don't think we can see your slides moving, or I can't. I don't know if anyone else can.
I'm so sorry. Which slide can you see?
I can see your base screen with Cambridgeshire and Peterborough local nature recovery strategy and a beautiful butterfly.
Is anyone else having these issues?
I just messaged you. I think you need to put it on presenter mode and then move through it. We're on the preview where we can see all of them. I just messaged you because I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but
no,
quite
you're
right.
Absolutely
quite
fine.
right, Amy. Thank you for.
I'm so sorry. Let me just
sorry,
stop and
we
reshare.
don't want to miss all the good stuff.
Fine. Absolutely. Thank you for letting me know. Can you see this now?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. I'm so sorry about that. Let me just. I'll go back to my previous slide so you can. Oh no! Now I'm going forward. There you go. So that was the previous slide that I was just talking about. The local habitat map and the statement of biodiversity priorities. These slides will be sent round afterwards, so I won't hang back too much. And then this was the slide that I was just presenting on. So these are the areas that we're hoping to focus on developing for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough local nature recovery strategy. And where was I? We want a document that everyone can get behind and building upon existing great work in the area, such as the Cambridge Nature Network. We've developed a governance framework, and we're utilising existing groups and partnerships and forums. We also want to link into other environmental incentives such as biodiversity net gain, ELMS, etc. As well as community engagement. It's really important that we are engaging with our local communities and that it's locally led nature recovery. We're going to be expanding upon natural capital opportunities. And lastly, just linking into those wider environmental benefits such as health and well-being, flood risk, climate change, etc. So progress so far. I came to this group back in December, and I basically gave you an update saying that we had commenced our stakeholder engagement work, our data and evidence work stream, and I procured the relevant consultants to support us as we started our journey. That started in October, but since October and December when I presented, we've really hit the ground running and have started doing a lot of great work. So the first one, the stakeholder engagement and communication work stream, I cannot take any credit for this. This has been solely Natural Cambridgeshire, specifically Pamela, that has been wonderful and pulled together expert workshops. We've got our development group meetings that are happening, as well as going to some community engagement events. We went to the Ely's Eco Fair at Ely Library in early February, where we engaged with local community members to gather their insight on what they want to see in their local nature recovery strategy. Pamela's also been doing some great work with farmers and landowners, going to the different cluster groups across the Cambridgeshire. We've started member engagement, as well as interest group engagement, and we have launched some surveys, which I will come to ever so shortly. The data and evidence work stream, we've completed our data request, which was going out to partners and key stakeholders, asking them for their habitat data. This was used to update our baseline habitat mapping, which has been completed now by our consultants, Natural Capital Solutions. We've also been working really closely with CPERC, the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Environmental Record Centre, as well as county recorders on species recovery, and that work stream is well underway. As well as commencing the opportunity mapping and the connectivity modelling that is to happen. All of this data and all of this information will be used to create the local habitat map and the opportunity maps for the Statement of Biodiversity Priorities that I mentioned on my previous slide, as well as gathering all of our outputs to start creating our priority long list, which is what Pamela mentioned previously of our priorities in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough for nature recovery and the potential measures that go alongside them. Lastly, our consultants, Land Use Consulting, who are taking on our author-editor role, have completed some desk-based research on understanding existing land use strategies and policies, and also that wider environmental benefit aspect that we need to now all incorporate into the first draft of the LNRS. So as Pamela mentioned, and as I just previously mentioned, we've got 2 surveys out at the moment. The first one is very much for individuals, members of the public who would like to tell us, what they want to see in their nature recovery, but also what species and what habitats are important to them and why. And we also have a second survey for local groups and organisations, and this is very much for these local groups and organisations to tell us what are their top priorities and why. The slides will again be circulated at the end of this meeting, so if you want to quickly capture these QR codes now, please do, but you will get these links at the end of the meeting. If you have any further questions, please do feel free to contact me at the local nature recovery strategy inbox. And then lastly, I wanted to hand back to the group. We've heard a lot of great conversation today following on from Rob's presentation, but also, I'm so sorry, name's dropped out of my head, on migrant birds, and there's been some really interesting discussions, and I'm personally really inspired to what's been talked about today, but I want to hand it back over to you, the audience today, and to ask you, tell us what do you care about nature and why do you love it? Please do share us your ideas and how these ideas and projects may help shape nature recovery in the county. So I'm going to hand back to Pamela, who's hopefully going to, in the last 10 minutes, moderate this conversation, and then I will be busy scribbling away with all of your ideas. But if you don't have a chance to speak, again, please send them across to me or partake in our surveys, because all of this information, all of this data will be fed into the final draft of the LNRS. That's it. Thank you so much. It was a quick whistle-stop tour.
Brilliant. Yeah, and we're just sort of finalising our final sort of engagement stakeholder meetings with 3 landowner meetings spread throughout the country. No, not the country, the county. And also going along, Helen was in Chatteris Library last week, and I'm going along to Linton Library this afternoon, and then I'm going to be meeting with Peterborough City Council members this evening to talk about LNRS, because ultimately the approval moves through the combined authority, which have been allocated, but also its constituent parts of all of the district and city councils and unitary need to approve this as it goes through its journey. So opening the floor, really, if you haven't spoken before, it would be lovely to hear from you. You've got a particular species that you kind of think, I just really would love to see it. I haven't seen it. I'd like to see more of it, you know, because as we know, the 2 components, abundance and presence, are very important too. So tell us, you can put it in the chat, you can put your hand up, you can leave me to flounder in silence. All of those things are equally possible. Okay, we're going for silence. That's completely fine. Helen.
Yeah,
thank you.
Just to Pamela, you mentioned I was at Chatteris Library last Friday, and it was great to be there. A small group that's convened by the library. I think this is their first sort of forum meeting. Lots of great community groups doing some really great things, particularly around tackling loneliness. The reservoir, the Chatteris Reservoir, was mentioned, and somebody said, "Oh, but remember, we'll be getting a reservoir." The general, and there were about 20 people in that room. Quite a lot of people didn't know about the reservoir. They'd received a letter and read something in the newspaper. So which just struck me how, yes, within groups like this, we're very aware of some of the big infrastructure projects and the challenges we're facing, but even at a very local level where people have these massive potential projects on their doorstep, there's very, very little low awareness about why they're happening and any detail. So I guess it's just a call to everybody here to to respond to Gabriella's question about tell us what we can do here through the forums that we have, through the forums that you can do to help to raise that awareness piece. And I'm really encouraged by Charlotte's mention of a group that's looking to get together or has got together to do this. Is that the way forward? Is it about collective campaigning? You know, I don't know. So just an observation and a comment and a call to action about what can we all do more of to really do that connection piece. As Rob really said really well, if sort of people don't connect with something, if people are not connected with their rivers, why should they care? But I think replace rivers with nature, with woodlands, with species, they won't care. How can we all do that better?
Very, very well said. And can we all be nature evangelists and nature ambassadors? And I noticed, Leslie, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in? And there's some great contributions in the chat as well about the Greater Chalk Stream project, and that libraries are great places and, you know, keeping green spaces, and also from Helen about the Ouse Valley and washes. Leslie, you want to come in?
Yeah, hi Pamela, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I can't put my camera on, sadly, but yeah, thank you so much. Great talks, to say that first. I'm just going to jump off of what the previous speaker says, which was really great, which is about engagement and campaigning, which is that I find in our local community there's no lack of amazing ideas of, you know, making free water butt campaigns, putting up Swift boxes, making Swift streets. There lots of amazing ideas from the community, but I find that the biggest difficulty is not sort of getting good ideas from the already engaged. It is it is convincing the people who are not already aware, if it isn't about the big projects that are happening, or which is the much bigger problem, I think, of the climate crisis at all, and the pressures that we face and the urgency. And so I was just wondering if they're like, I wanted to say self-help groups because of the frustration, but also a peer group or advisory groups about how to do campaigning in a positive, respectful manner that will engage those climate skeptical people and communities who are currently either in denial or just not aware or just not educated or not in love enough, like Rob said, with the local nature that is disappearing so rapidly. So I would just love any kind of advice of engaging those who are skeptical or opposed to those great ideas in the community.
That's a really good point, and a really good challenge. And actually, I wonder if I might move along to Sue, because Sue has got a hand up, but has also been, I know from our days back in Natural England years ago, has been sort of very much part of the Cherry Hinton Brook community. You know, spreading that that message, that engagement, that love, presumably in a community that has a mixture of people from the very engaged to the completely unaware or even antagonistic. You probably wanted to put your hand up to say something else. I'm sorry, Sue.
Well, related, but thank you. Yeah, I was listening to Leslie there and thinking, I agree totally with her, but actually I don't think we've done, I mean, we have tried in Friends of Cherry Hinton Brook, but one of the problems we find is huge dependence on volunteers for doing a lot of the work. And it's just really, really difficult. I don't know if there's a difference between the villages. I tend to think, having myself lived in villages and towns, villages, I think it tends to be easier to, not easy, but you can get people together because you have a sort of community feel there. But in the city with Cherry Hinton Brook, we've, despite having a constitution that says we have to change officers on our committee every 3 years, we have had exactly the same committee members for, since we were set up, since we set ourselves up in 2009. We found it impossible, really, with a few exceptions. Obviously, there are some great people, but it's so difficult. And there is a dependent, I feel, a lot of the agencies have these expectations of all these volunteers to do a lot of the work, and it's really difficult. And kind of linked to that, I suddenly realized Rob hadn't mentioned this Greater Cambridge chalk stream plan that grew out of that great, I mean, it's come out of that great report that the Wildlife Trust and Rob and the City Council did on all the Cambridge, I mean, it is Cambridge, well, Greater Cambridge, so this is Cambridgeshire, of all the chalk streams and the actions, immediate actions that needed going. And suddenly this report has kind of appeared, but this, again, with sort of remarkably little consultation. There's going to be consultation now on all the proposals, but it's taken, again, it goes back to my earlier comment about all these strategies. It's taken an incredibly long time for the report to appear, this strategy to be done. And I just feel we do so much talking. We listen to so many webinars. No criticism of this one, because I think it's very useful. It's got a lot of effective people on it. But we do, I think it might be a Cambridge thing, because a lot of us have got university backgrounds. We like to talk and strategize. And how can we get things moving a little bit? And I just wanted to flag up that fact that project, it's still a plan. I don't really know when the actions are going to start, but Rob, I don't know, Rob, if you can mention that. Apologies.
Yeah, Rob, if you want to come in, we've got a couple of minutes. So Rob, do you want to?
Certainly, Sue. I've been involved with Friends of River Shep for many years, and yes, the same people get involved in the same community issues, and it's trying to find new blood, and it's very, very hard, because often the doers are involved in so many things all the time. By definition, they are the doers, and other people sit back and occasionally join. But if it's something you like, keep doing it. Rob Martyr's latest Cambridge Chalk Stream plan, I haven't even seen it yet. I know it's out there, I just haven't got into it yet. It's important to have big plans, because big plans kind of unlock big money. But at the same time, Ruth Hawksley and I, we kind of quietly try and just get one thing done a year. I don't know how we manage to get things done, but we do. And it's important because we need to have things happening. Otherwise, the public and other people who need to be inspired will say, well, what have you done? And if we can't ever point at any positive change, then people will leave us. But I love showing pictures of positive change. That's why I try and make my talk so visual. But I also make sure that I try and just quietly get stuff done. I've got a project in my home village here in Shepworth this summer with Friends of the River Shep. We're looking to engage more people. We'll be connecting with the Cam Valley Forum so we can get a wider audience and get people trained up. So there's things that are bubbling away there. It's just
that is just
keep pushing.
That is a perfect ending note, really. I mean, I think the hashtag conservation optimism, because so many people get turned off when we just say, you know, all the despair. So it was just wonderful. And I think that the do one thing, it's the question that, you know, Helen's created a kind of survey when we go around and ask people. It's the kind of, you know, what is that one thing? So maybe we could all go away and do at least one thing and encourage all of our friends and family and connections and villages to do one thing, and then we could all, you know, collectively make a difference for nature. I'm going to finish there because we are at 12 o'clock. I'd like to thank all of our fabulous speakers. Thank all of you for joining in the debate and all of the excellent suggestions that have gone in the chat. Thank you all very much, and hopefully see you at the next one. Here's to more nature everywhere and more nature recovery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we stop recording as well, Helen, if that's okay?